ever been fascinated by France's rich past or its iconic figures? If so, the French History Podcast is a must listen. Today, the Evergreen Spotlight is on Gary Girard. With his captivating storytelling, he brings history to life, making it accessible for both history enthusiasts and curious minds alike. Gary, your podcast covers an incredible span of time, 3 million years in France. And I'm wondering what it is in your own background that made you want to focus here for your show.
I think that I really wanted to have an expansive view of history. Perhaps the most famous school of historians is the French Annalist, and they believed in what is called total history, which is that to understand anything, you have to understand everything about it. Nowadays, it's kind of fallen out of fashion, especially because of just how demanding that is, especially when you live in an era where there's just so many sources. When the Annalists were writing about the medieval period, they might have 2 or 3 books to read, 2 or 3, chronicles. But nowadays, if you want to, do a history of the coronavirus, you've got, billions of articles and different forms of information, what have you. So, but to the best of my ability, I want to have a full picture of France. And so we start with the environmental history. We look at how France used to be largely frozen over. Much of it was a tundra before it eventually ends up warming up and being hospitable for life. This is kind of the big theme of the podcast because in addition to looking at the environmental history, we look at politics, culture, do some just sort of one-offs about, any particular interesting figure or some sort of strange phenomena that happens in order to give us a fuller picture beyond what you might just hear in a more standard format. So that's really the energy that I'm bringing, trying to create some sort of big project that can essentially reach out to everyone.
My personal favorite has been the study on the Louis, like the kings. And I'm curious with all those topics that you cover, what's been a couple of your favorites, or if you have a favorite topic that you cover.
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of really fascinating things that I had not known about and was not prepared about. I think it was a bit funny that I launched myself into this topic, which I have to start from the beginning, very early on, going to the pre-Gaul period, then Gaul, then it becomes Roman Gaul, all of which is very ancient stuff, whereas I am a modern historian. My specialty is on World War I, so I've had to learn a whole lot of stuff to do this project. So, for example, I had no idea just how expansive the Norman conquests were, that the Normans didn't just conquer England under famously William the Conqueror, but they actually conquered the southern half of Italy and Sicily and created this sort of strange hybrid kingdom that included Latin, Western Europeans, included Greeks, including a very large Muslim population, and that they ended up creating this kingdom which was the only Christian kingdom that had a harem. So very fascinating stuff. So that's one thing that I definitely was very intrigued by. I think another thing was just looking at, how many governments France has had. I had an episode where I tried to figure that out. It's kind of hard to say exactly what fully qualifies, but there is a period from 1789 up until 1871 where it's basically going from monarchy, constitutional monarchy, republic, consulate, empire, monarchy, empire, monarchy. It's crazy. And so trying to figure out all this stuff,
Wow.
it's a fun problem to have.
Yeah, it's just it opens your mind to an entirely different world. I could tell like how immersive it can be just listening. You live now in Oklahoma. You're from Oregon, and you lived in France. What was it like to live in France?
Oh yeah, no, that was great. So I actually lived in southern France in a mid-sized town called Béziers, which for me, it was very kind of eye-opening. I was kind of a fun place. It's kind of a sleepy town. It's on this nice river. But as a historian, I knew about why it was famous because in the Middle Ages, there was a part of the southern part of France that was moved away from strict Catholicism. They adopted what is known as the Cathar heresy. They believed that there were two gods. There was the all good God from the New Testament, and then the God of the Old Testament was the evil one. And this ended up being the center of the Albigensian Crusade, the first crusade called against people who called themselves Christians. And in Béziers, which was sort of a hotbed of Catharism, the people of Béziers, they took refuge in this small church. And when the Catholics arrived, the Catholic Knights, allegedly, the papal legate told the Catholic Knights to set the church on fire and said that God will know his own. So it was a very kind of horrifying, but also very fascinating history. So it was very nice to sort of walk
Wow.
in that sort of
Yeah.
old period, old town again. Otherwise, it was really great because I got to teach. I taught English to primary school children. It was great to engage with the culture, certainly helped my French. And as a employee of the French government, I got 8 weeks off. Essentially, you get 2 weeks off
Wow.
here, then you'd work a couple months, 2 weeks off here. And so I just got to travel all around Europe. So it was a pretty wonderful time. I really loved that.
That is so great, Gary. What is something that the French have adopted that you wish the other parts of the world or the States would also adopt?
I really miss having good mass transit. I'm not a big fan of driving. I like being able to, hop on a metro and get wherever you need to go. Otherwise, just walking. Particularly, I've lived in various parts of the country, and there are a handful of cities where you can pretty much walk everywhere you need to go. But having lived in Houston and now in Oklahoma, I can say that we are a very car dependent culture. And,
Yeah.
I prefer to do the healthy European thing as much as possible and just walk where I need to go. There's something people need to connect with nature and I think their own body to an extent.
Well said. After I've just spent an hour in the car, I can totally relate. Very cool. So, the French History Podcast joined the Evergreen Podcast Network in 2023, and I'm curious what's it been like to be a part of a network.
It's been really great. I think that when you have a group of people who can work with you on technical issues, also work on marketing, connect you with more people, it takes some pressure off of me because I'd been doing the podcast for years, so I was well acquainted with that stuff. But having people who are sort of on your team is a very beneficial thing. And I've really enjoyed being a part of Evergreen in particular, just because I think that we've got a good crew, we've got good leadership, got a number of other good podcasts. I've especially gotten to know some of the other history podcasters who are part of this network, like Warriors in Their Own
Yeah.
Words. We sort of had a cross collaboration thing. And even if I'm not directly collaborating, just getting to know the other people has been a huge benefit and connect with them either as someone who is learning from them, or even serving as a mentor, which, as I'm going into my 6th year of this, is really a position that I have come to adopt. I've had a number of other podcasters come up to me, ask me how to do it, and I'm more than happy to uh, give them advice or even be on their show. I think it's funny because some people I think are kind of have been intimidated about reaching out to me, and I don't think people realize how accessible so many others are. I think I've pretty much accepted every invitation that I've gotten. So what can I say? I like people for the most part.
Such great advice. And I was here when the French history podcast was coming onto the network, and there was a lot of buzz because it really supports the mission to go global. So, very exciting, very cool to have you on the network.
Thank you.
Now, as far as the storytelling that goes along in your podcast, I mean, it's incredibly extensive. And the research, I'm curious of your approach to research and how you find the sources and making sure that it's reputable and factual.
Yeah, well, thankfully, as a scholar, as a assistant professor, I have access to a fair number of resources. Also, thankfully, JSTOR has now opened up much of its archives. So I have the ability to actually access a lot of peer-reviewed articles, peer-reviewed books. But more than that, when I can, I like to go to the sources themselves. So, for example, I recently did a series on the First Crusade and got to read through translated versions of the original Latin texts of, say, the speeches of Pope Urban II and others. Because as someone who's previously worked in the news media, I can tell you that there is no reality other than primary sources, that even as reputable as you might think your source is, whether it's Anderson Cooper or whatever, whatever network you follow,
Yeah.
even as they try to give you the real news, there is a bit of filter there. So as best as I can, I like to go to the sources themselves. But having said that, if I went to every single source for every single episode, I only be able to put
Yeah.
out one episode a year, and I would have even more people complaining, where's the next episode? So, as best as I can, turn to the experts on these scholarly books, and you get a podcast at the end. I do list my sources at the bottom of every single episode if you go to my website,
Wow.
so anyone can consult them. And if you think I'm wrong about something, go read them first before you write me a comment.
Nice. Well done. Now, for those of us, and I say this on my behalf as well, history was not my strongest suit in high school or college. How do you think reading and researching history affects, current day, or how can that help to strengthen someone's, really overall knowledge of what's happened in the world?
Yeah, well, I think that history gives one perspective and empathy, which I think is really important. I think particularly in these times, because I think, given all the crises that has occurred recently, not just political divisions in this country, but you've got the Ukraine war, Gaza, there was the global pandemic, economic problems, which ensued just afterward. And that's just in the last couple years. It's very easy to be demotivated, to resort to doom scrolling. But I sort of look at this in a longer historical view. And I think that, as crazy as it is to say, that we are kind of at a relative high point. I mean, if we look back just about 110 years, look at the First World War. In France, something like 1 out of every 5 men between the ages of 18 to 49 were killed, just killed, not even including the wounded. So you're looking at 2 out of 5 men who are going to either die in the war or come out with significant wounds. So absolutely horrendous times. Not only that, but if you look at, say, life expectancies, the average life expectancy for most of human history was 25 years, somewhere around there, just because so many people died
Wow.
in childhood. So, as bad as things are, I think that if our ancestors had the strength to carry on despite those horrendous conditions, it makes me think that, okay, maybe I can deal with whatever problem I'm dealing with today.
Well, Gary, are you ready to play some rapid fire?
Oh, no, sure.
What is your favorite French historical figure?
Oh, no. There's just so many. I'm alternating between Napoleon, not because, I particularly like him as a person, but because he's interesting. Another one, Joan of Arc, just because not only was she this, very inspiring figure, but she was also remarkably intelligent. I don't think a lot of people realize that here was this 17-year-old peasant girl, and she was put on trial by these leading theologians. And we have the transcript of her trial, and she outsmarted a lot of these trained, educated people. And
Wow.
they would ask her a question, like, for example, the theologians would ask her, are you in God's grace? With the trick being, if she said yes, then she'd be condemned because you can't know if you're in God's grace. And if you said no, well, then she's a fraud and her visions that she had are false. But what she said was, if I am not in God's grace, I hope to be so. And so she outwits all these, 40, 50-year-old lifelong academic men, even though she was this uneducated peasant girl from the middle of nowhere who spent her time fighting and leading soldiers. So, yeah, no, she's very fascinating.
Wow.
Kind of as a minor figure I'm getting into, and I doubt anyone's heard of it, but as a historian covering World War I, I've come upon this one figure, Alphonse Meerheim, who basically he fought a war within the war, that during World War I, he tried to lead the workers in Paris and across France to support the peace movement, even as his other labor leaders supported the war effort. So he causes a lot of trouble, and he's a very fun figure in that sense. So I guess those are my three biggest ones. I think I failed the rapid
Yeah.
fire because I answered too long, but there you go.
Well, I really like your answer of Joan of Arc. I want to now search your episode about her. That sounds incredibly interesting. What's been a period in French history that you would visit if you could?
Might want to see the Universal Exposition, the most famous one where the Eiffel Tower gets put up. I think that could be very interesting. Back
Oh,
when a lot of
yeah.
Parisians hated it because it didn't fit in with the landscape, as they said, and they wanted to tear it down. That could be really interesting. Maybe sort of the end of the Renaissance as these new palaces are coming in. As long as I could avoid some of the wars and plagues, I think things would be interesting.
Favorite French city to explore?
Maybe Strasbourg, just because it's very nice to walk around and it's got a very good feel. I think, in particular, what was really amazing was to just walk by all of the European Union buildings, and essentially it had an open feel. Like you could just walk up to where all of these officials are deciding important things for Europe. And it felt like a very democratic thing. Now, there's a difference between feel and reality. I know a lot of people might get pissed off because they don't view it as democratic. I'm just saying it felt that way. It felt that way to see people literally fishing in a creek next to the parliament of the EU. So, and otherwise, it's got good wine, good food. Strasbourg is very slept on big city in France.
Which do you prefer, baguette or croissant?
If I'm in the United States, croissant or croissant, as we would call it.
Croissant.
But if you're in France, definitely baguette, because when you get a fresh baguette that's just come out of the oven, oh my gosh, it's the best way to start your
Mm,
day. You can't beat that.
That sounds
Yeah, we really
amazing.
don't have that in the States. There are some that are trying,
Mm.
but so far, none of them have had that good crunch, that good texture that you get in France.
I think the States have donuts. That's what I
Yes.
think. Are there any upcoming projects or episodes or just future plans for the show that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'm going to continue on with my main series, which is currently covering Philip II, Philip Augustus, or Philippe Auguste, who one of the greatest kings in all of French history. He creates the original Louvre Castle. He defeats the Anglo-Normans, monumentally important king. Otherwise, at some point before too long, I'm going to do a patrons exclusive series on the history of Mont-Saint-Michel. On my Patreon, we have exclusive series. So far, I've done a history of the Louvre, which we're up to, I believe, 13 episodes. The Louvre has an amazing and long history. I was really blown away by just how much has happened there and how important it's been to Paris, France, and the world for so long. I sort of compare it to the Egyptian pyramids because the Egyptian pyramids are incredible and they have lasted forever, but they really haven't been doing anything for a long time. They're just sort of there. Whereas the Louvre has been a virtual center of much of politics and art for hundreds and hundreds of years. So before long, I'm gonna do a series on Mont Saint Michel and other wonders in France. So I'm always doing something. Feel free to tune in. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Gary, for being a part of today and just your contributions and sticking with podcasting. You definitely have withheld like the test of time. So congratulations to you as well.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again for Dr. Jerry Gerard for joining Evergreen Spotlight. Whether it's history, pop culture, or news that you're exploring, Evergreen Podcast has that for you. Give us a listen. You can check out the full catalog at evergreenpodcasts.com.